Well, thanks for joining us, especially in late afternoon. I'm Tim Anderson. I'm the large cap biopharma analyst at Bank of America, and we're doing a 25-minute fireside chat with Biogen, which is one of the companies I've covered closely for a number of years now. And it's a company with a long legacy in the area of neuroscience, who's brought to the market some very important transformative products and pushing into new domains now that we'll be talking about as well. So we're happy to have on stage Chris Viehbacher, who is President, Chief Executive Officer. He's been in that role since 2022, and I've known Chris for probably as long as I've been doing this job. And he brings really a wealth of experience, both US and international, from his experience at both large pharma companies and smaller companies as well. He was CEO at Sanofi for 6 years. He spent, I think, 20 years at Glaxo, a number of years. And after Sanofi, he co-founded Gurnett Point Capital, which was in Cambridge. So with that, we're going to kick things off. We're going to start with some high-level topics. So we've had a few companies here today that I cover. Those were heads of R&D. Happy to have you as a CEO to talk about some of the macro policy stuff, because you'll be seeing it from a different angle. And there's lots of disruption, potential disruption, and proposed change out there. And maybe you can talk to some of these things, whether it's FDA changes, CMS changes, payer changes, MFN, tariffs. It's a very long list. So the question is, how is that impacting the day-to-day business, and how much of your time does that take?
Well, thanks, Tim. It's great to be with you, and thank you, Chris, for the invitation again this year. One of the things about Biogen is that we basically are one of the first biotech companies to help create Kendall Square, and it's relevant to the question because we're a spin out of essentially MIT. We're founded by two Nobel Prize winners, one's from MIT, one from Harvard. And the strength of the whole ecosystem here in the Boston-Cambridge area has been through the strength of our universities, the proximity to teaching hospitals, the wealth of venture capital here in Boston, and then the people that come from around the world here. And as we see what's going on with the NIH, we had billions of dollars of grants that have been blocked, and there has been some targeting of Northeastern institutions. So as a company, we're concerned just even about the future, because that ecosystem is the most prolific of any place in the world, and we need all of those institutions to do well. Our governor has been very active in helping to offset some of that. She just initiated a DRIVE program to help sponsor key researchers who've had their grants cut. And we've got now countries abroad that are starting to try to pick off some of our top scientists. So it is concerning, and we have certainly been working with others in our ecosystem to try to improve that. The good news is that in Congress, I think we have very strong support for innovation. Congress is concerned about the competitiveness of American innovation, particularly versus China. China has now is a rising power in innovation. A lot of licensing of new molecules coming out of China, and that's actually good for healthcare. I don't think it should be a zero-sum game, but equally there is a lot of concern at the administration level about national security and the security of our drug supply chains. So it is important that we maintain a strong, innovative industry. And so I think that is pretty secure at a congressional level. And I think to a degree at the administrative level as well. I think I am quite concerned about the CDC in particular. I think so many millions of lives have been saved by vaccines, and we really need to make sure that safety is not eroded. I think at the NIH, some change probably will occur that might make sense. I mean, people have been talking for years about, do we really need 31 institutions? But at the same time, years ago when I was at Sanofi and we were acquiring Genzyme, one of the reasons was I wanted to be, as a French company, here in this ecosystem. And I used to say, the NIH is really a crown jewel, because it is not just a funder of innovation, but it sets up a competitive system so that constantly the bar on innovation is raised. And it's largely apolitical. You know, in a lot of other countries, well, we have to fund this region, we have to fund that region. But, you know, this is really assuring excellence in science. So we absolutely need to protect the NIH. The FDA, you know, again, I think I am concerned around vaccines. At the same time, I think the FDA commissioner has talked about better use of real-world evidence, which I think most people would think is a good idea. Use of AI to accelerate the process. We certainly welcome the principles for ultra-rare diseases because it's very difficult to do clinical trials in such small populations. So these principles that outline particularly plausible mechanisms of action, I think are good. So, you know, whenever you have change, there's good and there's bad. But, you know, I think one of the things that we have to, as a country, realize is that countries today compete on brain power. You know, this isn't the days of cheap labor, and investing in education, investing in innovation is what makes countries strong. And you know, you're sitting in a region here that's probably as I say, one of the strongest of anywhere in the world.
When you think about some of the changes that have been talked about, whether it's drug pricing with MFN or other changes, you think we'll end up in a spot where it'll be fairly modest changes when you look back, let's say 2 years from now? Or are some of these forces that are going to substantially reshape how drug companies do business, not just R&D, but even commercializing drugs and geographies that they play in and disease areas that they want to be in and that sort of thing?
You know, I think one of the things we have to do is just find where we can common ground. I think, you know, if you look at the administration's priorities, one is, I say, security of the supply chain. The other is, of course, manufacturing and reshoring of manufacturing. And our industry has put on the table hundreds of billions of dollars of new investments. But of course, to be able to fund those investments, we still need to be vibrant as an industry. You know, we have tariffs that are out there, and we have most favored nation pricing, which is really a reflection of the fact that there is a difference in pricing between Europe and the US. Now, some of that is because the list prices in the United States have really inflated over the years as we've seen PBMs extract bigger and bigger rebates. So one of the things that we remind the administration is that out of every dollar spent on medicines in the United States, we as the innovative industry, we as the industry that have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on research and development, only get 48 cents out of that. 52% go to middlemen and distributors. Now, when you're in Europe, we sell $1 worth of medicines, we get 95 cents. So, you know, it's hard to compare pricing because of some of these distortions. That said, you know, I think it is also fair that other countries start to spend more, and we have seen that with defense. We go around to European governments and say, the US spends about 0.8% of GDP on medicines. France is spending about 0.3, Germany about 0.4, and yet the biggest single export of Europe, anywhere in the world, but including the United States, are biopharmaceuticals. So, in other words, Europe is benefiting from all of the jobs and the investment in Europe and from the balance of trade, and yet has not been willing to fund innovation to the same degree. And I think if we could get Europe to increase its prices, then, as you know, R&D is largely a fixed cost. That would make it more affordable for everybody. So I do think, to answer your question more specifically, there is going to be, at some point, all of these things on the table. I don't think it's going to be costless for the industry, but I think whatever cost there is, I think we'll end up in a place where it's manageable. And as I say, I think, you know, Todd Young, for instance, just in the Senate, put out a report of the national strategic importance of biotechnology, not just to healthcare, but also to agriculture and other areas. And so we have to make sure that, you know, in all of this, we don't lose what is one of the absolute core pillars and strengths of our country.
I know that you and I were talking earlier, and you were, I think, saying you're on the Hill maybe once a month, and I know a lot of other CEOs and senior executives have been in Washington trying to educate the administration on different points. The question for you is, do you get the sense that the administration is open to hearing what you guys have to say? To me, and the feedback I have is that they actually are, and so they're maybe going into it a little more open-minded than what some people might think.
Yeah, I think they are as well. I think that's why we haven't actually seen actual final decisions. Again, there is this desire to change a lot of past practice, not just in healthcare, but more broadly. That is shaking up an awful lot of past practices. We see this in defense. We're seeing this in other areas. I think still that there is this concern about making sure that the world is fairer on who funds innovation, and I think we'll end up getting to the right place. I mean, certainly there are others in the cabinet. There's regular dialogue. So there's a lot of headlines, but what goes on behind the scenes, I think, will be more constructive. And again, at the end of the day, do you really want to hurt an innovative industry? And I'm not just talking about the biopharmaceutical industry, but we have some of the top universities in the world, some of the top hospitals, and this is not, as I say, just improving healthcare, but this is building competitiveness in a world where technology is so important.
Okay, so let's shift. The point of the conference is really to focus on innovation, and Biogen's certainly done innovative things. I thought we'd start with Alzheimer's, which is a core area for you guys, and it's a core pursuit. And when I look back at the drug industry and what's happened, that's fairly transformative in terms of brand new big disease areas opening up. A couple come to mind. Alzheimer's is one, obesity is another. And you guys have been at the forefront there and have a main product on the market now, Leqembi, which supplanted the earlier product, which is Aduhelm. Eli Lilly now has a drug on the market as well called Leqembi. So the product's been on the market, I think, 2.5 years. Started off slow, starting to ramp, very complex set of logistics, but it seems like there's clear momentum for acceleration and an appreciation that this drug, it may not be a magic bullet, but in the context of the disease burden, it really brings a lot to the table for patients that are struggling and their families. So do you want to kind of give us an update on what's happening on the commercial front? And then we'll kind of shift to some scientific questions as well.
So Alzheimer's is a very complex disease, and tens of billions of dollars went down the drain as people tried to find a cure, and there were really two core problems that had to be solved. The first one was, could you get enough drug across the blood-brain barrier? And the second one, who is the right patient? Because in a neurodegenerative disease, as you progress, you lose increasingly neurons, and we don't know how to bring those back to life. And so what we were able to do with our partner Eisai in Japan was we were able to get enough drug across the blood-brain barrier, and we realized that you really need to get patients earlier. But in that whole process, there had been some question about is amyloid beta really the right target to go after? And the other is that this is now a major shift in how neurologists practice medicine. You need to have a cognitive assessment for a patient before you can even think about a diagnosis. Second is that then you need to validate that diagnosis with either a PET scan or a lumbar puncture. And then, we need to monitor you for potential side effects, so we have to schedule 4 MRIs. And then we have to also have infusion beds every 2 weeks. We had in one major hospital, a neurologist said we had to do a business case to demonstrate why we'd use the infusion bed for an Alzheimer's patient instead of an oncology patient. So this has been a huge amount of work for the neurologist. And a lot of what we have been trying to do is to facilitate the treatment and accelerate the ability of the neurologist to see patients. So we've never had a demand problem, we've never had a product problem, but this was a huge capacity to treat problem. So now what we've been able to do is we've got blood-based diagnostics. Many Alzheimer's patients are at primary care. It can take 3 or 4 years today before someone says, well, maybe this is Alzheimer's and not just aging, and we'll send you to a neurologist. But up until now, about 50% of patients who get that difficult to get neurology appointment has not been eligible because their disease is too far advanced. Blood-based diagnostics can do 2 things. One is we believe over time that this will be able to eliminate the PET scan and the lumbar puncture. And the second is this is a tool now for primary care to get to a diagnosis earlier, because there's growing evidence that the earlier you treat, the better. Second is that we've been able to eliminate potentially now the infusion beds for the patients who are on the maintenance therapy by the approval of a subcutaneous formulation. So this means that a patient can now take a single injectable pen once a week. We expect by the middle of next year to have an injectable for the induction process. So now you can actually eliminate the infusion bed coordination and reservation for most patients who start on therapy. So and of course in the meantime, neurologists have been able to increase their staff to do a lot of this scheduling. So what we're starting to see is a lot of these catalysts where now the right patient is getting in to see the neurologist. The neurologist really has a simpler time to actually diagnose, has adapted their office so that they can now take care of the patients without their personal intervention. And that's where I think you're going to now see this market expand much more rapidly.
So blood-based biomarkers just really rolling out. At the moment, they're still almost used as a triage tool, and you still have to confirm amyloid positivity either with PET scan or CSF. What's the time frame, do you think, and what's your confidence that these biomarkers can actually completely replace PET or CSF testing?
So now that you have these tests approved, they can do that today. So when you put a patient on, you have to go to a registry by CMS. There's a little drop-down menu that says, how did you validate your diagnosis? There's PET scan, there's lumbar puncture, and there's other. And if you hit other, you can get to the diagnostic. A PET scan costs about $5,000 a year. The blood test costs about $140 a year. Now, the blood test won't tell you how much plaque you have, but if you have a cognitive assessment, then most physicians will be able to prescribe on that basis. Now, that'll take some time because physicians are quite used to using PET scans and in particular in lumbar punctures. So probably over the next 6 to 9 months, we'll see an increasing utilization of the blood-based diagnostic. But there's nothing to stop them from doing that today.
And I guess that this will be enabled also by reimbursement for the blood-based test, which I think kicks in January of 26. So that'll probably be a trigger as well. Okay, so you guys recently got approved a sub-Q formulation. The Lilly product, IV, your product has been IV. Now, at least in the maintenance phase, you can give it sub-Q, and a patient or caregiver can take it at home without needing to go to an infusion bed. How much of a game changer is that going to be, in your opinion? And any hurdles initially? Why wouldn't that suddenly take off? I think you and I were talking earlier, at least for 2025, maybe miss the formulary window for Medicare at least. So maybe that'll be more of a 26 ramp.
So there are 500,000 new patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's every year. So the demand is huge. And to your earlier point, I talked to quite a lot of investors. Point out there are 2 big megatrends in healthcare. One is obesity, as you said, and the other is Alzheimer's. So I just heard actually this week there's 80,000 people turn 65 every week in the United States. So we need this because a lot of people are having to quit their jobs to take care of elderly parents, for example, and this can actually help significantly, because one of the other things was that we did the first clinical trial, but nobody had ever shown that you could move things on cognition before. But it comes back to who's the right patient. If you look at early stage patients, those who have low levels of tau, we actually showed that 70% of patients were actually stable for 6 months, after 6 months of treatment. No further decline, and 60% actually improved. So that's part of the story, is making sure we get to the right patient. Then you have all of these other things. We think all of these things, this information about early stage patients, the blood-based diagnostic, the sub-Q for maintenance and the sub-Q for induction, all converge in 26. And I think then we'll be able to see more and more patients and an acceleration of patients getting the benefit of Leqembi.
Let's talk about moving upstream. So the science, I think, started out really looking at later stage patients. And then once the studies started looking at early cognitive declines, that's when a clinical benefit could be shown. And now there's big trials running that look at amyloid positive patients who lack any sort of symptomatology. Lilly has a trial, Trailblazer ALS 3, and you and Eisai have AHEAD 3-45. So what's the outlook for those trials and the confidence that those are going to hit? Because to me, it's a very different risk-benefit profile. You're talking about patients that have amyloid. It doesn't mean they're going to get Alzheimer's just because you have amyloid. And now you're infusing a product that isn't completely benign. No product is. So what are the odds that those trials show something that's clinically meaningful in the context of kind of that risk-benefit calculus that you always need to do?
So, I mean, one of the most challenging things about Alzheimer's is that by the time you have symptoms, you have probably been growing plaque in your brain for a decade or more. There are probably people here who have plaque growing in their brains right now and they don't know it, right? And now, the opportunity therefore is, can we go after that pre-symptomatic patient? So Lilly is running a study today in patients who are probably just on the cusp of becoming mildly cognitively impaired. They have a time to event endpoint. So I think the benefit of the Lilly study will again show the benefit of early treatment. But it won't necessarily say, okay, I've got someone in their early 60s, they've got a blood-based diagnostic that says they've got plaque. I've done a PET scan, I've got maybe 50 centiloids of plaque. Do I treat that patient or not? The study that we started in 2020, 5 years ago, and that still has another 3 years to go, is a landmark study where we look at first patients with less than 40 centiloids, because 40 centiloids is the level of amyloid that is believed to cause the overproduction of tau, and it is tau that really makes the severity of Alzheimer's. So maybe if we can actually stop the production of tau, we can actually prevent Alzheimer's. That's the promise of that study. And then for patients who have more than 40 centiloids, but say around this 50, no other symptoms, that their endpoint is cognition. And there, we should be able to provide the risk-benefit equation for a physician to say, all right, this person, we can treat them now, because again, once you've lost the neurons, we don't know how to replace them. So if we can actually stop that progression today, you could probably live a lot longer. So our belief is that the market is going to move to more of this pre-symptomatic. We have the data. The subcutaneous is extremely important in that case because you're going to be on drug for a long time. But hopefully we can avoid a lot of the burden of Alzheimer's by the time we get there.
Another target in Alzheimer's is tau, and there's been some failures in the tau space, at least with monoclonal antibodies. You guys have a novel tau approach, which is an antisense oligonucleotide. And what's unique about that is that lowers intracellular tau as opposed to the monoclonals that lower extracellular. So potentially very promising and differentiated. And I think you guys are really ahead of the pack on something that targets intracellular tau. So what's the update on the development timeline, and when will we see data?
Yeah, again, this is Biogen. It's one of the reasons it makes me very proud to be part of Biogen. We really go after pioneering some of the most challenging healthcare problems. Alzheimer's is one. It costs billions to do these studies. Just even for tau, we've been working for years on this. But we do believe that tau could actually be a game changer for Alzheimer's. And it's, as I say, you need both amyloid and tau to have Alzheimer's, but it's really the tau that really seems to be the most toxic part of this. And we are doing this study that'll have a readout in about the middle of next year. This will be the first time that anybody has demonstrated what happens when you significantly reduce tau. And our belief is that that's going to have an incredibly important benefit on efficacy. But even if that's positive, we still have to do a phase 3, and that one trial, not including any failures, that one trial is at least $1 billion to do. And for a small company like Biogen, or a smaller company, that's a huge investment and huge risk, but it is what Biogen does, and it comes back to the ethos of this community. We're here to really pioneer and find innovative treatments. We don't settle for me better or me too technologies, and that's what we really have to protect here in Massachusetts.
I know you guys certainly have a lot more than just Alzheimer's products, either on the market or in development. You're also pushing into immunology increasingly. You sell drugs for rare diseases. I know that in the pipeline, a couple of compounds that the company's talked about more and more, one in particular, which is this felzartamab.
Right.
Do you want to give a quick plug? We're a little over time, but maybe you can.
So immunology, this is precision immunology. You know, anytime you have an autoimmune disease, at some point someone's going to try to tamp down your immune system to treat you. But of course, you need your immune system. What this drug does, it goes after just the NK cells and the plasma cells where these autoantibodies are produced. And we go after that, but we leave the rest of the immune system intact. So it's sort of precision immunology, if you like. We're going after a number of rare kidney conditions. One is, for instance, kidney transplant. We've been able to demonstrate that when a kidney starts to be rejected, in 80% of cases, we've been able to reverse that rejection. But there are a whole bunch of other indications that we could go through with that are, again, come back to these autoantibodies that are at the root of so many autoimmune diseases. We also have 2 new medicines coming in lupus, massive unmet need in lupus. We believe that with our background in multiple sclerosis that we can bring that expertise to also help lupus patients. And again, all of these complex diseases, you need multimodalities. We're doing that in Alzheimer's, we're doing that in lupus, and we'll do that in immunology. But immunology is fascinating because you start actually with the immune pathways, and they are often common to a very diverse set of diseases. As my friend Elias Zerhouni likes to say, we describe too many diseases by their symptoms or where we might find a tumor, for example, in oncology. What you really want to do is go back upstream. What is the cause of these diseases? And that's what you can do in immunology. And we're developing disease-modifying medicines because of that understanding of the immune system. So, you know, I think we've got 3 major growth drivers as we look forward. It's Alzheimer's, it's immunology driven by lupus, and then we also have felzartamab, which is really a portfolio and a product. So I'm super excited about where the growth of Biogen is going over the coming years.
Chris, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks to Biogen for presenting at the forum.
Thank you, Tim.